first question I wanted to ask you. I read a little bit about what you said was the role of the church and social justice being such a crucial part of it. In your church, you said it's actually written into your mission statement.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Well, we have 6 parts of our mission statement. To worship God, save the lost, mature to save, provide fellowship, compassionately to minister to human need, which is mercy ministry, and then transform society, which is our justice ministry. And those two, all of it is related, but we make a distinction between mercy ministry and justice ministry because sometimes people get them mixed up. They think that if people are hungry or they're naked or they're homeless, that doing something to help alleviate that is justice. But in fact, what we're calling justice is the forces that create the hunger or create the homelessness or the police brutality, et cetera. And so our concern is to make sure that we understand that there are systems that often create consequences and that we don't want to be simply concerned about dealing with the consequences without dealing with the system that create the consequences. So that's the way, and so we believe that justice is central to what it means to be a Christian and central to the gospel message. Because if gospel or euangelion means good news, then what is good news to the oppressed? What is good news to the poor? What is good news to the broken? It is to be relieved of not just the consequences, but the causes of those things that create suffering.
So what would you say to Christians who haven't actively gotten involved in this? What would you say to them?
Well, there would probably be 2 things. I'd find out what their position was on the issue of justice, which was so crucial to Jesus' ministry, because some people are involved in justice ministry, they're just not involved in demonstrations. And I believe in the division of labor. I believe that everybody doesn't have to necessarily be in the streets in order to participate in justice ministry, obviously, because protest is in part designed to bring attention, creative, dramatic attention to the issue. It also gives protesters a way to constructively deal with the rage that they have, but it is to highlight and keep before people the issues at hand. But protest leads to productivity when it leads to policy change, legislation. Of course, we do as a church, we're interested in changing people's hearts. That's important. But Dr. King said something that's really important as well. He says, when someone said, well, why are you engaging in legislation? Legislation can't make you love me. And he retorted, it can't make you love me, but it can keep you from lynching me. And I think that's important too. And so we believe that you protest those issues to bring attention to it, but then the protest leads to ways in which policies, legislation, and the like change the way people are, the way the Commonwealth or the city or whatever relates to people. Those persons who are Christians but are not involved, who do not think that justice has anything to do with it, have a very truncated understanding of what the gospel is. Usually it is people who are privileged or who have been educated by institutions that are educating them who are privileged, because they usually spiritualize things in the Bible that directly have to do with justice issues. There's actually a Bible called the Slave Bible, for example, and they cut all of the scriptures that have anything to do with justice in it out of it because they didn't want slaves to recognize in the Bible that there's so much of justice, and there's little left of the Bible because it is so central to what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
I've seen with your title, pastor, activist, activist, pastor. Can you separate the two, or do you see them as the same thing?
Yeah, I don't think you can. I think as a pastor, my role is priestly as well as prophetic. And priestly is that I tend to the needs of the congregation, feed them. So part of my job as a shepherd, so to speak, is to feed the flock. But it is also to protect the flock. And part of my responsibility is to engage in ministry, social justice ministry, that addresses systemic violence, systemic evil. And so as an activist, I'm involved in making sure that justice issues are dealt with. And our church understands that that is not simply my responsibility as a pastor, but it's every person's responsibility as a Christian. It's woven throughout the fabric of our understanding of what it means to be a Christian. So those two are not mutually exclusive terms.
We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the killing of Breonna Taylor. Your reflection on that with this past year and everything that you've seen, has there ever been another year in your pastoring that even comes close to this?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things about this year that's really
Right.
unique. You know, we're in a pandemic that happens every 100 years. And I don't think that Louisville is actually, I think Louisville has seen a number of things, but it's at a critical moment now. And I think the murder of Breonna Taylor is one of those issues that the city and those who are concerned about the issue, because it's Breonna Taylor, but it's larger than her. And this is one of those issues that the world protested about. There was protests all over the world. This is the first and only issue I know of, and I've been involved in social and justice work for a while. This is the only issue I know of where there were protests in all 50 states simultaneously. So this is not, when people think, and I think public officials and others who are hoping that things would just cool off and we go back to business as usual, I had to tell them this is not that. This year, coming up on a year, has been one of those years where people are determined to help forces, you know, the powers that be, understand that we're not settling for anything but substantive change. That this is not going to be one of those instances where we're allowed to blow off steam and then we just go back to business as usual. It's too critical, it's too close. It's the climate, if you will, of the nation is such that it's not going, it was exacerbated by, I think, exacerbated by the previous administration, Trump. And it's just, we're at a place where I really think the nation is really at a crossroads. I think we really need to decide whether we're going to go into the direction of living up to the what's been articulated in our social documents. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Are we actually going to do that? And there are those of us who are committed to making sure that that is a reality. And so coming up to this 1-year celebration, commemoration, a recognition of Breonna Taylor's death means more than just what happened to Breonna Taylor. It is a culmination of so many things that had happened, Ahmaud Arbery and others. There's a long list and litany, we know, of people who have, for example, been victims of police brutality and et cetera, and all of the issues and implications of police brutality, mass incarceration, school to prison pipeline, inequities, white supremacy, racism, all of them are just, we're not settling for anything less than what should be the case. And there are people who have a more sophisticated understanding of what racism and white supremacy is also. And there is an encouraging amount of genuine allies who are not African American or people of color, but who understand that this is wrong and are educating themselves and are encouraging others in their neighborhoods and in their circle of influence to engage and participate in this as well. The issue will not be resolved just because black people participate in it. It's going to take black folks, white folks, and others in order for us to effectively address this. So this year coming up means a lot. We're not going away. We're not settling for anything less than justice, and it will affect so many other issues, no-knock warrants, et cetera.
We've seen some change. Does this feel different to you? Does it feel like, you know, you mentioned that crossroads. There are times that I think, okay, I think we're going to get it done. Mm-hmm. And then I see other things and I go, oh, have we come anywhere?
Yeah, it's a pivotal moment, and it's up to the nation. It's up to, as I mentioned earlier, just having black people, and it's interesting when you deal with issues like that, people think that the solution is what black people do because people have historically, the country has historically seen black people as the issue, the problem. Black people are not the problem. The way the relation has related to the black people historically is the problem. And so that's why people often say, well, that's in the past, why don't you just get over it? Well, there are a number of reasons, we could talk about it if you want, that we can't and shouldn't just get over it. One of the reasons why we can't get over it is because of the damage that has been done for 401 years. And if the nation is really serious about repenting of its sin of racism, then they need to repair the damage, number one. Number two, what created the damage still persists. It has just evolved in the different forms. So Michelle Alexander has a book, The New Jim Crow is an example. Carol Anderson has written a book about white rage where she traces how historically the nation has responded to any perception of black progress, always with white rage. You've always heard about black rage. Black rage is a legitimate, rational response to oppression. White rage, however, historically, is irrational fear because it is always rage against perceived progress of black people. There's always a reaction. I believe, for example, that Trump got in office as a reaction of 8 years of Obama. And so, but that's just a small example of it.
But you've also talked about, I heard, and I think it's interesting, that a lot of it is fear with the power structure changing, and that is in part some of the reaction from white people.
Yes, absolutely. And it's rooted in something larger. For example, in the next couple of decades, they know that America is going to be more brown than white. Now, people have been interested, they think it's interesting that that's a fact. I think what's more interesting is that somebody did the analysis. Why do you need to know when the nation is going to be more brown than white? Well, it's fear. If you are a part of a system, especially if you're actively involved in oppression, if you're a part of a system and you're really and you have been oppressing another people, but the people, it's interesting in the book of Genesis, it says about the Israelites when the Egyptians were oppressing them, that the more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied. And so people of color are growing, the number is growing. What people are fearful of, people who are where they are because they have treated other people the way they've treated them. What they're afraid of is if you share power, then the people who get power might do to them what they've been doing to others. And so that's part of the fear. The other part of the fear is the loss of privilege. When people start understanding that you are where you are because you've been favored by a system simply because of the color of your skin. Now, you may not agree with the system insofar as the injustices or inequities, you may not be personally prejudiced, is what I'm saying, but you still benefit from the system. Once you realize that, you have a decision to make, whether you're just going to continue to be a co-conspirator and complicit with the system, or are you going to be actively involved in dismantling something that you know is unjust.
Which is anti-racist.
Right.
Taking that action.
Exactly right.
Taking that action. Let's talk about pivoting right now. We have a new police chief. There have been policies that have changed to a degree. Some officers have gotten fired. Your thoughts on the new chief, who seems to have an affinity for restorative justice from everything I've read. I had a conversation with her. She seems committed to it, to teaching the history of why policing has origins, with slavery and what that represents, certain things about it. Are you at the point where you can give her a chance? Have you spoken with her? Have you met with her?
Yeah, I haven't. She called. I haven't had a chance to meet with her yet. I guess my attitude is she'll never have a chance if you don't give her a chance. She was looking for a job, and we hired her. The city hired her. My issue is not that she accepted a job that the city. My issue is the process, and because it happened in such a way that the public didn't know until it happened, generally speaking. And I've been involved in processes where the police chiefs have been, and it was more public than this was. And given the public's perception of what happened in Atlanta when she was in Atlanta, and how a crisis came and she stepped down. And so people thought she walked away from a crisis when she could have been there. Her rationale is different, but the public's rationale, public's perception was that it was negative. And then to have her come here in the middle of a crisis we're having of the same type when she walked away from the other one didn't make any sane sense to a whole lot of us. And so she's here now. She is the police chief. They roll the dice. It's a great gamble. So there's either great good or great evil going to come out of this. She's already in the position. So my position is that she won't have a chance if you don't give her a chance. If, in fact, she is committed to the things she says, then the proof will be in the pudding, not in what she says. So we will see. There have been some changes, and we'll see just how far they go. One of the things I know that will be evidence that she's doing a good job is when she makes the FOP upset with her.
Are you willing to meet with her?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes, I am. Mm-hmm.
Let's say the first thing you will say to her is what?
Hello.
Okay, then what?
Welcome to the city. And then we'll talk. And what I suspect will happen is that she will tell me where she's coming from, what she's committed to doing, ask me what I think is important, those type of things. And that will be a good conversation. What will be important to me is what will happen after the conversation. And so
Action.
I'm only interested in what is substantive, not symbolic. Now, symbols have their place, but I'm interested in results now. People's lives are on the line, and the city took a big risk in terms of hiring her, given public perception and a wounded, hurting community. So she's got a lot riding. We've got a lot riding on this, and so we can't afford for her to fail, and I don't want her to fail simply because we didn't give her a chance. So I'm absolutely willing to meet with her and speak with her, but I'm only interested in results.
Let's talk about protests. Do you see those starting up again? Will you be part of those? Where does it go from here?
Well, I think when it comes to Breonna Taylor, I think there'll be more gatherings, more protests, because the city still doesn't feel like, the community still doesn't feel like justice has been done. The policemen have not been really punished, and I don't think that there will be any ceasing of that. I think also that they will continue in light of how they respond to no-knock warrants and all of the other issues that have spun out of what is related to the issue of police brutality, social justice, mass incarceration, those things here in Louisville. The city is still smarting from it. The city is still wounded by it. And I mean essentially the black community and those who are allies of the black community and those who are participating in justice. It was painful. That decision, the initial decision, was painful because the decision really had nothing to do with what happened to the police, had nothing to do with what happened to Breonna Taylor, as you know. And so, in fact, it had nothing to do with her. And so I know some things have transpired since then, but there are still some unresolved issues, one of which has to do with it even includes the Attorney General, Cameron, who now you've got jurors who are speaking up about improprieties that happen as a consequence of what appears to be him participating in some effort to cover up. He's been a co-conspirator in it. And so that's another issue that we want to address. And so that legislation and what we continue to do in this city, all of the policies, I think in Frankfurt, some of the decisions that are seeking to be made in Frankfurt with regard to no-knock warrants. I think there was one bill, and they ignored
Attica.
Attica they
The
ignored
other one
hers.
has more exemptions
Yes.
versus hers, and I know there was a caravan recently for that. So
Right.
you're looking at those things. I did want to ask you something the chief said to me. I know downtown is smarting a lot. It's hurting. People are saying, I don't know that I'm going to come back downtown. The chief said to me, and I thought it was interesting, she said, you can have healthy social justice and a vibrant downtown. They're not mutually exclusive. What do you say to people who say downtown is hurting from a pandemic, and some would also say in part because of protests? What do you say to those folks?
It was interesting because I know some people were complaining about the fact that the buildings were boarded up. And there was a lot of passion about the fact that the buildings were boarded up downtown. My question to them was, where was all this energy when there were buildings boarded up in the West End? And it's been that way for decades. So boarded up buildings are only important when they affect you directly, but not when they affect fellow citizens who've been having to deal with boarded up buildings and abandoned businesses for decades. So it's hard to feel any sympathy when in fact there was no sympathy for a suffering community for decades, and this is an inconvenience to you because of downtown. It also lets you know that some people have this perception, it appears, that downtown is for them and not for others. And so people who don't have access to, who don't really feel like downtown was really created for them, are saying, welcome to our world. Welcome to what it's like to suffer. Now, it's in no way, shape, or form to the degree it's been in the West End. But for people businesses to be frustrated because there's protests, are people who are frustrated about symptoms and not frustrated about the problem. So you're dealing with the fruit and not the root. And we're dealing with the root. We want to deal with the causes. Nothing seems to get your attention. Protests apparently got your attention. Hopefully, your eyes will open so that you'll realize what's going on more than on a superficial level, that your buildings are boarded up. What about why people are protesting? It is the equivalent of people upset with the football player Kaepernick, with him kneeling and not upset with why he's kneeling. And the root of it. And so it's frustrating for us to listen to people upset about boarded up buildings downtown when buildings have been boarded up in our communities for too long.
Let's talk about some of the new incentives for West End activation and investment. You've seen some of those things being proposed. Your thoughts on those?
Well, again, for me, the proof is in the pudding. I have a great deal of confidence. I have a great deal of excitement with what the Urban League and Sadiqa Reynolds has done with the new athletic complex. In my opinion, early on, I believe that it would be an economic engine and not an economic island. There's already going to be there already have been some things that spun off from it as well. So I think them targeting the West End for development is way overdue. What I am concerned about, number one, is that the people, when it comes to development in black communities, people think of buildings and not people, which are the most valuable asset. So if in fact there's going to be development in the West End, it should not be at the expense of the residents in the West End. So people should not be displaced simply because there's being development, number one. Number two, businesses should make a priority, black businesses, especially businesses from people who are residents, because what ends up happening is that people now who are interested in being in the West End, who before would not go past 9th Street, will now go to the West End, set up businesses, make money, take resources out of the West End because they have a business in the West End, but they don't live in the West End, they're somewhere else. And so that's another concern of mine. So development should be for the people in the West End, because if in fact you let them languish from neglect and resources being taken out of the West End, then they should be the beneficiaries of the benefits that are coming to the West End.
I read something with you and your church in one of the poorest zip codes in Smoketown. There was a fire at your building. You had the chance where you could move, and some people were going, oh, now you have a chance to leave.
Right.
You chose to stay, and your answer to that to me was very profound.
Well, yeah, I was told, we had a fire, and I was told by some well-meaning but misguided people that this is the perfect example for you to go, because you're in a community where there is crime and poverty and all the pathologies that accompany that. And now if you leave, you can go, it'll be safer, more people will come, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought about it for about a millisecond, and all the reasons they said we should leave, I thought were the reasons we should stay. And if God was God, I wanted to see God be God in Smoketown. And I also thought that there would be people, there are people who would not come to the community because of the reputation, but there will be others who will come because of the reputation. That is, they want to come and do something that matters. They want to come and make a difference in the community. And lo and behold, that is what has happened. We had 80 members when I went there. There's thousands of members now. I don't even know how many. And the wonderful thing about it is, see, I don't believe you have to live in a community to care about a community. So we have people, probably 1,000 or more just in that zip code who go to our church. But they come from all over the place, which is good because there are people who are of different class in our congregation who may not live in Smoketown, but when they come, they bring their expertise and resources with them. And so as a community of faith in the Smoketown community, we have this benefit, this possibility, and it's actually happened and is happening, of convening all of these resources in such a way. And the black church is one of the one institutions that black people control, and that there is the potential where black people can deal with soma, psyche, and pneuma, mind, body, and spirit. And so that is what has happened in our church, and as a consequence, we've made a major impact on the community.
Did you always want to be a pastor, or when did you know?
I never wanted to be a pastor, ever in life.
Says the pastor.
Yeah, never. My
when...
father was a pastor, and I said, I'll never be a pastor. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be an attorney. And I didn't want to live in a fishbowl, you know, because that's exactly what pastors do. And I saw how people treated my dad, so I wasn't about to do that. And so I made my plans, and God laughed. So when I ran away from the prospect of being it for a while, but I knew in my spirit, I knew inside of me that this is what I was supposed to do. And so I would never have any peace unless I surrendered. The irony is, the very thing I never wanted to do, and I promise you I never wanted to do this, once I surrendered to it, I can't imagine doing anything else. It's what I'm created to do. It's what I'm on earth to do. And that's a wonderful thing, because a whole lot of people live their whole lives and never figure out why they're here. I have, and so what a blessing.
Your role then, you see it as nourishment for others, you see it as a catalyst for change. How do you view that role as a pastor? Because people look to you in this community. Mm-hmm. You had a police chief reach out to you. Mm-hmm. You are an influencer. How do you use that, and what in this situation do you think your voice can mean?
Well, I've been in the church for 35 years. That's all my adult life. And I think my service there and what has transpired as a consequence of the leadership there and what I've done throughout the years has earned me some degree of respect and influence. My perception is that I should be using my influence for people who perceive that they don't have any. And so that is how my influence isn't for me. My influence is for people who don't have access. So I try my best to use whatever influence I have on behalf of others. I also, whatever training and skill in others, I use to help empower other people. Now, of course, as a Christian, I believe in having a personal relationship with Christ. So there's a personal dimension to this, because I think that people's lives personally can be transformed. But there's a social component to this as well. If you love God, that's one thing, but love your neighbor is the other. And the Bible says on these two hang all the law, so they're inextricably bound together. In fact, you can usually tell the health of a person's relationship with God based upon how they treat other people. And so the social dimension to it is important as well. So we teach that as well. We're also concerned, and it has been the history of Black church, is that we're concerned about every dimension of a person's life. That's education, that's family, that's the social, that's economics, that's everything in a person's life. People often ask, well, what do you guys want in your community? What do you want in Smoketown? And my answer is what you have in your community. Everything you have in yours. We want good schools, we want clean water, we want a safe environment, we want justice and equity. So I feel like my role is not only to connect people with God, but after having connect people with God, to teach people what that means in terms of relating to other people, and to do it by trying to demonstrate it in my own personal life, and then empower others in our community of faith to do the same, so that we can model that living in front of others, so that we show it to each other, but then we engage the world as well. Cornel West said that justice is what love looks like in public. And so if we're talking about love, love is not some syrupy, sentimental, sappy thing. Love is one of the manifestations of love is a just society. And so I see my role, that's part of my role. You don't have time for me to tell you for everything,
Well,
but that's part of my role.
And I had to ask you, I texted you and I said, be prepared for this question, and you put LOL. Because I said, so many people are now throwing their hat into the ring of political office. Have you ever considered that, or do you think you're more effective where you are?
That's interesting because my undergraduate degree is in political science.
So you're running for something, is
No,
that
I'm
what you're
not. You know, what happens is I got a degree that gave me sense enough to know not to run for office. No, I really think that's really effective. I thought about it, but I don't really have any. I think I'm more effective holding public officials accountable. And as a person with a large church, also encouraging people to run for office. Rather than being a person that runs for office and try to do 100 things, when I get 100 people to run for office. And so that's the way I feel. I feel like we should be preparing people. And right now, all over this city, we have people placed in Sadiq was a member of our church. Delquan Dorsey is a member. We have so many members in strategic positions who have a certain mentality about service. And as a consequence, it will serve the city well. I feel better about being able to inspire, teach, motivate, and move people in our congregation to move out and do it rather than do it myself. But I want to be in a position to be able to say to someone in public office who they respond, I see members, they see votes. So if I can use that leverage to help them behave in the right direction in terms of policies, procedures, et cetera, then that seems to me that it would be more effective than me being in office myself.
My final question, best lesson you ever learned?
Don't quit. Don't quit. Don't. And I learned that lesson early from my father. And he didn't say don't quit. I just watched him. And after 35 years of ministry, one of the things I found out is that things that are worthwhile rarely happen quickly. It takes time. And so you have to be a person that sees what you're doing not as a sprint, but as a marathon. You have to see it, so you have to pace yourself. And it takes perseverance, it takes faith, and it teaches you not to treat temporary situations as if they're permanent. You think they're permanent because you can't see the change, or you don't know when it's going to change. So you treat it as if it's permanent, but it's not. It's temporary. Things change. People change. Or people change. You know, either people's hearts change or there's another person in that spot. So, and I also think that our success and effectiveness with regard to this issue of Breonna Taylor and the like is going to be effective because we have served notice that we're not settling for anything less than what is right. You've seen an increased number of people who are running for office now who didn't before. You see, of course, it's happening all over the country, and our city is no exception. That's deliberate. We have made a deliberate decision to identify people, run them for office. Charles Booker, who's running for, he's a member of our church. So I've learned, whatever you do, don't quit. You know, you don't lose if you get knocked down. You lose if you stay down. So if you keep going, you keep putting one foot in the other, you keep surviving. Sometimes it's like the piece I wrote for you all. You know, sometimes victory is this great ostentatious thing, and sometimes victory is the fact that you survived to fight another day. So that's one of the most valuable, a lot of them, but one of the most valuable lessons I learned is whatever you do, don't quit.